I am Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria. For years, my heart, my every thought was fixed on one place, Jerusalem. To many, it is just a city of stone and dust. But to me, to my people, it is the heart of our faith, a symbol of our honor. It is a prize that transcends earthly value. The year was 1187. On the arid plains near the Horns of Hattin, destiny was forged in the heat of battle. We faced the might of the Crusader kingdoms, a formidable assembly of knights who believed their cause was righteous. But righteousness was on our side. The desert sun was our ally, thirst our weapon. We surrounded them, cutting them off from water, and when the time was right, we struck. The victory at Hattin was absolute, a testament to the will of God and the unity of our forces. The Crusader army was shattered, their king Guy of Lusignan, and many of their most vaunted nobles, my captives. This victory was not the end, but the beginning. It was the key that unlocked the path to our ultimate goal. With the main Crusader army destroyed, the road to Jerusalem lay open. City after city fell to us, their gates opening not just to our swords, but to the promise of just rule. Finally, we stood before the walls of the holy city itself. The siege was short. Jerusalem, which had been lost to us for nearly a century, returned to the fold of Islam. I entered not as a conqueror seeking vengeance, but as a liberator. I ensured the safety of its Christian inhabitants, allowing them to ransom themselves and depart in peace. This was not just a military victory. It was a moral one. I wanted to show the world that faith could be defended with honor and magnanimity. Jerusalem was ours again, a beacon of our civilization. But peace, I have learned, is a fleeting dream. The echoes of our victory at Hattin and the liberation of Jerusalem traveled across the seas, carried on the winds of outrage and disbelief. In the grand halls and cathedrals of Europe, the news ignited a fire. A new crusade was called a Crusade of Kings. They called it the Third Crusade. And this time it was not just land-hungry nobles who answered the call, but the most powerful monarchs of the West. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. Philip Augustus, the King of France. And Richard, King of England, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and awe. Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart. Word of their coming reached me like a gathering storm on the horizon. Barbarossa's massive army was already marching overland, a tide of iron and steel. Philip and Richard were assembling fleets, preparing to descend upon our shores. The shadow of this new immense threat began to stretch over the lands we had just reclaimed. I knew this would be a struggle unlike any before. These were not the fractious lords we had faced at Hattin. These were kings, commanding the full resources of their nations, driven by a potent combination of religious fervor and personal glory. My spies brought me tales of Richard the Lionheart. They spoke of a warrior of legendary prowess, a brilliant strategist, and a leader who inspired fanatical loyalty in his men. They said he was as ferocious as a lion in battle, yet as cunning as a fox in council. He was not an enemy to be underestimated. I knew that the coming confrontation would test every fiber of my being, every bit of my skill as a commander and a statesman. This would be a clash not just of armies, but of wills, a duel between two worlds. The first blow fell at the port city of Acre. It had been under siege by the remnants of the Crusader forces for 2 long years, a brutal, grinding conflict of attrition. My armies had tried relentlessly to break the siege, to relieve the valiant garrison trapped within the walls. But the arrival of Philip and then Richard, with their fresh troops and formidable siege engines, turned the tide irrevocably. The fighting was savage. Day and night, the air was filled with the crash of trebuchets, the cries of the wounded, and the clash of steel. From my camp, I watched the city suffer, my heart heavy with the knowledge that our relief efforts were failing. Finally, after a heroic defense, the garrison of Acre could hold out no longer. They were forced to surrender. The terms were agreed upon. The garrison would be spared in exchange for a ransom and the return of the true cross, which we had captured at Hattin. But what followed was a stain upon the honor of the Crusader cause. Richard, impatient and ruthless, grew tired of the negotiations. In a shocking act of brutality, he ordered the massacre of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners, men, women, and children, in full view of my army. The sight filled my men with a righteous fury. This was the man they called noble? This was the Lionheart? It was an act of barbarism that revealed the true nature of our enemy. It hardened our resolve. We would not be intimidated. We would meet this cruelty with unwavering courage. After the fall of Acre, Richard began his march south along the coast. His target, the port of Jaffa, a stepping stone on the path to Jerusalem, I could not allow him to advance unopposed. My strategy was clear. I would harry his army every step of the way. My light cavalry, masters of the hit-and-run tactic, became a constant torment to his column. We attacked his baggage train, picked off stragglers, and launched swift, sharp raids that gave them no rest. We scorched the earth before them, denying them forage and fresh water. I wanted to bleed his army, to weaken it, to wear down its spirit before we committed to a full-scale battle. The sun beat down mercilessly, the same sun that had been our ally at Hattin. Richard's army, clad in heavy mail, suffered terribly. But I must admit, their discipline was incredible. Under Richard's stern command, they held their formation, a slow-moving, heavily armored beast bristling with spears and crossbows. They endured our attacks with a stoicism that was both frustrating and admirable. Richard himself was always at the heart of the action, a towering figure, rallying his men, his presence a force of nature. I observed him from a distance, studying my adversary, gaining his measure. He was indeed a great warrior. The inevitable confrontation came near a place called Arsuf. I chose the ground carefully, believing we could finally break his disciplined march. We unleashed a storm of arrows, wave after wave of our horsemen charging, feigning retreat, and charging again, hoping to lure his knights into a disorganized pursuit. For hours the Crusader line held firm under the onslaught. But the pressure was immense. Eventually a group of his knights, the Hospitallers, could bear it no longer and broke ranks, launching a charge without orders. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the crack in their armor. But Richard, in a display of tactical genius, turned a moment of chaos into an opportunity. He did not try to rein them in. Instead, he unleashed his entire force of heavy cavalry in a thunderous, decisive counterattack. The charge was devastating. It smashed into our lines with irresistible force. My own troops, who had fought with such bravery and tenacity all day, were momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer weight and fury of the Frankish knights. I was in the midst of the fray, rallying my men, trying to reform our lines, but the momentum was with them. We were forced to withdraw. Arsuf was a defeat for us. There is no denying it. It was a tactical victory for Richard. He had proven his mettle in open battle. But it was not a decisive victory. His army was battered, and though we had been pushed back, we were not broken. The road to Jerusalem was still long, and I knew this war was far from over. Following Arsuf, the nature of the war shifted. Richard captured Jaffa and began to rebuild its fortifications, establishing a base for his final push towards Jerusalem. But the winter rains began, turning the roads to mud. His supply lines were stretched thin, and my forces were a constant threat, lurking in the hills. The Grand Crusader army that had set out with such confidence was now bogged down, its morale sinking with the endless rain. Twice, Richard marched his army to within sight of Jerusalem. Twice he was forced to turn back. He could see the walls of the holy city, the prize he had traveled thousands of miles to claim, but he could not take it. He knew that even if he could capture the city, he could not hold it. His army was shrinking, and the moment he turned for home, I would be there to reclaim it. It was during this time of stalemate that a strange sort of communication began between us. We exchanged gifts, messages, even doctors when Richard fell ill with a fever. Through our envoys, we began to speak of peace. It was a strange dance of diplomacy, conducted between battles and skirmishes. I saw in Richard a man bound by his own code of honor, a worthy adversary. And perhaps he saw something similar in me. We were both kings, leaders of men, fighting for what we believed in. There was a mutual respect, an understanding that transcended our enmity. We were two lions circling each other, each recognizing the strength of the other. Ultimately, we both understood that this war could not be won outright by either side. Richard's time in the Holy Land was running out. Troubles were brewing in his kingdom back in England. My own resources were stretched, and my emirs were weary of the long war. The time for a resolution had come. After long and difficult negotiations, we forged a truce. The treaty we signed was a compromise born of necessity and mutual respect. The coastal cities the Crusaders held, from Tyre down to Jaffa, would remain in their hands. But Jerusalem, the heart of the matter, would remain under my rule. However, I guaranteed that unarmed Christian pilgrims would have free and safe access to visit their holy sites within the city. It was not the total victory I had once dreamed of, but it was an honorable peace. It secured the greatest prize, Jerusalem, for our people, while acknowledging the deep faith of the Christians. It brought an end to the bloodshed. Soon after, Richard the Lionheart, my great adversary, set sail for his home. I never saw him again. The Third Crusade was over. We had faced the mightiest kings of Europe, and we had endured. The Holy Land was, for now, at peace. My name is Saladin, and this was my struggle, my duty, and my honor. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about the great figures of history, be sure to subscribe to our channel.